It was the spring of 2017, and I was deployed to the Middle East, flying missions for the Air Force. I remember one specific mission. We landed on a dirt strip at night, and it was blacked out, so no lights, using night vision goggles. And there was ground fire on the way in, and there was ground fire on the way out. So we were set up for a very brief amount of time on the ground, and because of some unrelated issues, we ended up having to delay a few minutes. So I had some spare time, and I remember I got out of the seat, and I went downstairs, and I jumped off of the ramp, and I walked out to that right wingtip. And I kneeled down and I scooped up some dirt and put it into a thermos. And I looked back to my left at the engines, and through the night vision goggles, the engine exhausts are white hot. The infrared heat is coming out of them. And the sound of the fan blades at idle reverse whizzing inside the casings. And I looked up and I could see every star that's out there from horizon to horizon. And I checked the time, and I realized at that very moment, my mother was in a courtroom on the other side of the planet, desperately trying to ruin my life. My name is Mark Ruff, and my mother sued me for $50 million that never existed.
My name is Kelly Ruff Frazier, and my mom sued me for $50 million, which never existed.
My name is Tracy Ruff Bakshi, and my mom sued me for $50 million that never existed.
My name is Mike Ruff, and my mom sued me for $50 million that never existed.
In 2011, my mother filed a lawsuit against my brother Mike, my sister Tracy, my sister Kelly, and myself. But she did not name my brother Matt in that lawsuit. The main reason that she sued me is because she wants to hurt me. Because I sided with my brother Mike in a family dispute. Those aren't my words, those are her words.
Why did you sue your son, Mark Ruff?
Mark?
Yes.
I don't know. I guess he's part of the group.
Part of what group?
My 3 children who are not Mike, Tracy and Kelly and Mark.
And why do you put them together in a group?
Because, I don't know, that's the way the lawsuit is going. I mean, why do you ask?
Because you filed claims against him. He has hired me to represent him.
Oh.
And I'm trying to find out the basis for those claims. Why
He
did
has
you
taken
sue?
Mike's
Wait,
side.
Let me finish my question and I'll let you finish your answer, okay? Why did you file claims against your son, Mark?
Because he sided with and said ugly things and horrible lies about me with Tracy and Kelly and Mike.
Okay, I'm going to break that down. He sided with Mike.
And Tracy and Kelly.
And Tracy and Kelly. And then you said that he said said ugly and horrible lies about me. Mm-hmm. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, anything else?
No.
Okay.
My father was a great man. I'm so fortunate to have been born into the family that I was. And, he served his country. He didn't come from much. He was a self-made man. And he went off to Vietnam at a very young age and was a combat veteran, 2 Purple Hearts and a Bronze Star for Valor. And came home and cleaned up his act and wanted to make something of his life. He worked very hard for many years, both with the city of Dallas and with the business community to raise money and have a Texas Vietnam Veterans Memorial built very similarly to the way the National Vietnam Veterans Memorial is on the National Mall. So it's made out of Texas pink granite and it's down at Fair Park. And It was a big project. It consumed a lot of his time and energy, but it was a very worthwhile thing, and I'm still proud of it to this day. When I was 13 years old, my father got some bad news. He was diagnosed with rare non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and he was told he had a few months to live. Due to the lack of medical care options at that time, he fought it as hard as he could and did a bone marrow transplant, did rounds of chemotherapy, and it was the long goodbye. It was a very ugly, hard-fought battle that unfortunately he succumbed to. But along the way, he certainly taught myself and my siblings about courage, about controlling the things that you can control and doing your best on the things you can't control. As a family, we stuck together through some very tough, hard times, and my father would get better for periods of time and would be able to come home and live with us. I remember specifically, not too shortly before he passed on, I remember waking up in the morning and before going to school, going over to the bed where he and my mom would stay in their room, and I would climb in bed. It would still be warm, and I remember it was just my dad and myself, and his skin was stretched so much, and he was had so many fluids in his body and lesions all over his skin that he would love getting a back rub. So I would just scratch his back, and he was wearing a robe but still underneath the covers. So he had gotten up and then had come back to bed, and he's lying and he's facing away from me, and I'm just scratching on his back. And I remember saying to him, I don't know what we're gonna do without you. And he rolled over and he looked at me and he said, Mark, you don't have a choice. But I will always be in your heart. And I will always be in your mind. And if you take care of each other and you take care of your mother, you're going to be okay. And a few weeks later, he was gone.
So I've actually led a really blessed life. I went to private school here in Dallas. I was lucky enough to choose to go to Rice in Houston. And while I was down there, I actually was lucky enough to play football. So I got kind of the best of both worlds. In December of 1993, my freshman year, my father was diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And so over Christmas break, when I was back in town, he said, look, this is something that I've got. I don't know where I'm going, but I'm gonna fight it as best I can. And he and I spent about 2 weeks together that Christmas break. And I made a really important decision, and that was that I was gonna graduate from Rice early. I was gonna come back up and I was gonna spend as much time with him as I could to learn the businesses and to learn from him. And it was a huge career choice. I was down at Rice, I was pre-med. I'd wanted to be a doctor my entire life. And yet fate changed that based on his illness. And so I switched majors. I graduated with a degree in economics and finance, and I came back up here early in December of 1995 to start working directly for him. He really did know that he was at risk of dying. And while he didn't want to, and he fought as hard as he could, especially in that last year of his life, I recognized that he was really trying to make sure he was having substantial conversations with me about life, about his faith, and about what he wanted for our family if and when he did die. And so in January of 1998, when he died, it was this earthquake for the family. But at least he had prepared me and had spent an enormous amount of time that I didn't get before as a youngster. But something had changed in him. And so those were really 2 golden years that I wouldn't trade for anything, because I got to spend so much time with a man that I truly loved and respected. And it's those years that shaped me and prepared me for the business world for the next 2 decades.
I consider myself so lucky to have had him as a father for 19 years. I know some people never get the opportunity to have such a compassionate and strong and funny dad who really, above all else, loved his kids and loved his family. And I think gratitude is the biggest emotion I feel towards him. It's so heartbreaking to me that he, didn't get much time at all. I mean, he was 53 and he had so much to give, and was so impactful in my life in just 19 years. And it breaks my heart that now I've been alive longer without him than with him. And that's a really terrible milestone. And I miss him terribly. I often fantasize about what life would be like if he were still alive and if he were with us.
When my father passed away, he put in his will that the assets were supposed to go into a marital trust and spousal trust. That was primarily to take care of my mother, who really had never managed money, had a checkbook, didn't truly balance it. If it ever went over, more money came in. She was the executor of the estate and chose not to fund the trust. She chose to just keep the assets in her name. And that was great for quite a while. The oldest brother, or the oldest boy, my most immediate in age, Mike, was essentially the one who took care of all of her business, managed everything, did balance the checkbook, the accounts. And fortunately, my dad was very successful. There was a lot of money that he made over the years and that she was able to use. Unfortunately, she went through it very quickly in the beginning, and there was concern that it wasn't going to last. At that time, Mike and the rest of us felt that a corporate trustee was really needed because somebody had to tell her to stop her spending.
In the 2011 lawsuit that we call PR11, my mother claimed fraud, breach of fiduciary duties, and several other things. I'm trying to think of the right way to say this, but I don't have $50 million. My family never had $50 million. I don't have $1 million, let alone 50, or whatever share of $50 million I am being accused of having stolen. So the way I know to describe it to people, because I've had to tell this story so many times over the years, because people go, your mother sued a mother sued her child? I have to explain, yes, she did. The way that I explain it to people is in our civil court system, the burden of proof, the requirements with which to pursue civil litigation against someone are much different from in the criminal world, where charges get brought forward and someone's freedom is at stake. So therefore, the the bar is very high for getting past just an initial look by the court system.
Well, I'm just trying to distinguish. There was a complete stranger that met you, befriended you, stole your money, and you decided not to file a civil or criminal action against her. And yet, you've decided to sue 3 of your 4 children for reasons that I still don't entirely understand based on your testimony today. I'm trying to understand the difference between the two.
$50 million disappeared.
Do you have any evidence as you sit here today that Tracy took any of that money?
I don't know.
Do you have any evidence as
No,
you sit here
there's no.
today?
I don't have any evidence that Mike took it. There's no documents.
So my mother first sued 4 of her children in 2011. And what she wanted to do was she wanted to change or amend the Ruff Management Trust so that she could then take all that money and give it to whomever she wanted. During that process, I actually filed for a simple arbitration. I paid $2,000 for what's called a declaratory judgment action. I wanted 5 documents declared valid and binding, all 5 of which our mother had signed. Releases, indemnifications, and the trust agreement itself that was designed specifically to protect her and her assets from creditors so that she would be taken care of for the rest of her life. So for $2,000, I pay a fee with something called the American Arbitration Association. I thought it was going to be a 3 to 4 week process and we'd quickly be over with it. Instead, it blows up into a multi-year absolute disaster that cost the Ruff family more than $1 million, being mired in an arbitration that actually ended up being completely fraudulent, completely secret, and didn't do justice for anyone except for the arbitrators who paid themselves over $600,000 and for the plaintiff's attorneys who ended up with over $4 million in fees. Again, with no facts, with no evidence, and with no record. So one of the amazing things about this case is that there has actually never been any evidence presented of any wrongdoing on my part or on the part of my siblings. And even today, in any court, the Randall Mathis lawyers simply haven't produced it because it doesn't exist. I didn't take any money from my mother. I didn't defraud her of anything, and neither did any of my siblings. This is something that was concocted in a back room as some sort of retirement case for these guys. It's a way for them to transfer wealth from the Ruff family, from the Ruff Management Trust, and into the pockets of corrupt plaintiffs' attorneys.
One horrifying aspect of this botched arbitration is that now a legal document states that Mike Ruff stole money from his mother and started CSC Corporation. But there's a problem. CSC Corporation was founded in 1899 by 2 lawyers in Nevada. Mike Ruff had nothing to do with CSC Corporation, never has, never will. However, all the Mathis lawyers have to do is demand Mike Ruff turn over CSC Corporation's tax documents. And when Mike Ruff cannot produce any tax documents relating to CSC Corporation, they can cry foul and file a motion for a judge to hold Mike in contempt and send him to jail.
So the way I describe it is, if it had been a criminal matter, if my mother had walked into the Dallas Police Department station and said, I want 4 of my 5 kids arrested, the police officer would say, wow, okay, let me get a pen. Why do you want them arrested? She would say, they stole my car. And they would say, okay, what kind of car? Let's just say a 2014 Ford Explorer. Okay. What color was it? Maroon. Okay, maroon. What was the license plate number? She would say, I don't know. Okay, how about the VIN number? And she would say, I don't have the VIN number. It's okay, you would have to have car insurance, so we'll call the insurance company. We'll get the VIN number, or we'll look in the database. We would go type and look in the database. No Ford Explorer registered to Susie Ruff. And then the insurance company say, well, we don't have an insurance policy on on a Ford Explorer for Susie Ruff. And right then and there, the police officer would say, Mrs. Ruff, we'd love to arrest any of your children that you want us to, but we're gonna need to know that something happened. We need evidence. So we need to know that, one, you had a 2014 maroon Ford Explorer, and two, that it's been stolen, and then three, why you think your children stole it. And then if we have evidence, then we can pursue this even further. But in civil court, she's never had to prove that she had $50 million. She's never had to prove that it got stolen. And she's never had to prove that any of her children stole it. And one of the big ironies is that the one child of hers that she's not suing went to federal prison for 7 years for felony possession of child pornography. Now, he lives with her now that he's out. And so, for whatever reason, she's claiming that 4 of her 5 children stole imaginary money that never existed. Yet, the person with the criminal background, he's innocent. He's just a good kid. He's just misunderstood. And so right then and there, the depth, the damage that mental illness can do starts to become apparent. The simple fact of the matter is that the mental illness does run in my mother's side of the family. Her father, and then obviously now she suffers from it. And people gloss over it so many times in life. And it's just now coming to the forefront in our society how important mental health is and how damaging mental illness can be. So when I explain it to people, I have to say that what kept the wheels on for most of my life, from the very beginning up until my father's passing, was my father was such a strong figure and such a good leader and was able to manage and cope and help and, more importantly, stabilize my mother. So the way I describe it as it's like a 3-legged stool. So for the years leading up, it was stable and it was just fine. But when my father passed on, one leg of the stool got kicked out. And so it was just a matter of time until it fell over. Was it going to fall over this way or fall over this way? Didn't know, but it was going to be one of them. And unfortunately, it has fallen over on a level that is just, the destruction it's truly awful. It's hard to describe. So when people ask me about it, I say, my mother suffers from mental illness. They go, yeah, sure, mental illness. And I said, no, she's been diagnosed with 4 different mental illnesses. And they go, okay, sure. And I say, bipolar disorder, atypical depression, somatoform disorder, and borderline personality disorder. And they go, yeah, sure, mental illness. I say, no, I don't think you understand. Several years ago, my mother had my father's body exhumed against his wishes. As a Christian, as a devout Christian, he wanted to be buried. It's in his will because he believed his body would be his vessel when he is ultimately judged. And that was very important to him. And 15 years after his death, she decides on her own to have his body exhumed and cremated against his wishes so that she can keep his remains in an urn away from the 4 of us kids. So for me, that is deeply disturbing on a number of levels. The immediate one is that I have to think about money being spent for a stranger to remove his casket from the ground after 15 years, take it to some place where it gets opened and his remains are removed and put into an oven and burned down to a crisp, just so that my mother can have the headstone removed and keep him away from us. That is deeply disturbing. That is not what he wanted. And when I explain that to people, they are shocked and horrified, and they go, oh, she has mental illness. And that's when they start to understand the destruction that it can do to a family.
So after my father died, my siblings and I did our best to make sure that our mom was taken care of. We had a bunch of sympathy for her. We tried to do what we could to keep her from hurting herself. But because of her multiple mental illnesses that really worked against her, that caused her to think things that weren't happening, to cause her to create a reality that didn't exist, it became harder and harder to manage her. And then on June 17th, my sister Kelly's birthday in 2008, a bomb was dropped on our family. And that's when 6 Dallas police officers showed up at my mother's house with a search warrant for child pornography that my brother Matt had been downloading in huge amounts. The family was devastated. My mother was devastated. There were 26 videos, more than 5 minutes long, of children under 6 years old being raped. My brother is a sociopath. He's a pedophile. He's a child pornographer. He has a violent past. He's choked my mother. He's attempted to kill her. He's threatened to kill my brother Mark. He stalked my wife and my children. And so when this happened in 2008, that's what started the family coming apart at the seams. And ever since that day in June that those officers showed up, my mother has been unable to face the reality that one of her children is this sociopath that is a horrible person and who does terrible things and has put all of us at risk.
Psychiatric illness is so difficult. In medicine, there are some things that are absolutely straightforward. What's your blood pressure? Do you have high blood pressure? You take a measurement, you either have it or you don't. Psychiatric illnesses are largely a spectrum. Personality disorders are a spectrum. So what makes them disorders are that they negatively impact a person's ability to manage their life properly. Everyone's brain is different. Everyone views things differently. And if your perception is so skewed, you can absolutely be taken advantage of by corrupt individuals. This case is interesting. Very early on, one of the attorneys, one of Mom's attorneys, emailed a psychiatrist that he's used for many years in his legal work, a consulting psychiatrist, that she may have a dependent personality and wanted her evaluated. He called her, I think, an heiress, and wanted her evaluated to be sure that she was competent and that he could represent her and get her to do what he wanted, but maintain competency so that his legal agreement would be valid.
I'd like to direct your attention to the second paragraph that starts, "We would like to see Kelly, Tracy, and Mark out of the lawsuit. It was never intended that they be in the lawsuit, and we don't want to fight with them." Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
I'm going to stop right there. When it says it was never intended that they be in the lawsuit, did you intend to have them in the lawsuit?
Do you not get that I'm not the decision maker?
Who is?
My lawyers.
I don't get that. No, I honestly don't.
You know what?
Do your
You're
lawyers not do what you ask them to do?
Yes, but I ask in generalities.
So your testimony is that you're not driving the boat in this litigation.
Well, I mean, I'm not driving it, but I'm sure signing, and I'm sure in the boat, yeah.
You don't think that if you went to Mr. Mathis tomorrow and said, "I would like to dismiss Tracy, Mark, and Kelly out of this litigation," you don't think he would say, "Okay, I understand"?
Why would I even do that when I don't know enough about all of it to think that?
So my mom is actually vulnerable based on her diagnosed borderline personality disorder, atypical depression, somatoform disorder, and bipolar disorder. That makes her very vulnerable to exploitation by anyone around her. And so for the last 4 years, there's been a systematic elder exploitation by Randall Mathis, by my brother Matt Ruff, by a paralegal named Lynn Vu, and others working in concert. Her identity's been stolen. She's had more than $2 million taken from her. My siblings and I have all written to the court begging for somebody to help her, and yet nothing happens. One of the harder things to watch happen in the courtroom and outside the courtroom is to see a big bank's lawyers working in conjunction with plaintiff's lawyers who are taking advantage of my mother, who are exploiting her, in conspiracy with each other, working together, laughing about this, all the while taking property that doesn't belong to them, but using a system and using their law licenses to convert property that my father spent his lifetime building, put into a trust that was for my mother's benefit and for her family's benefit. And instead, these lawyers get together and figure out ways that they can take that property and make it their own, improper ways, and yet using the system to steal and to take what's not theirs and to line their own pockets. So once my mother threatened Tracy, Kelly, and Mark that if they didn't resign as trustees, she was going to sue them, we interviewed and we found Frost Bank, because Frost Bank had told us they had experience in working with beneficiaries that had psychiatric illnesses. And so it seemed like a good fit. And so the trust protectors of the trust appointed Frost on a revocable basis. And when Frost took over, there was more than $7 million in the Ruff Management Trust. That was on March 1st of 2010. Here, 9 years later, there's less than $2.7 million in the trust. Instead of growing, during that time, the trust should have grown from $7 million to over $15 million. Instead, over $6 million was distributed to impermissible parties, to lawyers, to big banks lawyers, to plaintiffs' lawyers, and stolen by my brother Matt more than $500,000 in a prison scam for sending United States Postal Service money orders to Mahopac, New York, to other places, supposedly for medical journals, supposedly for courses for him to learn in prison. It turns out there is no prison facility in Mahopac, New York. It was another scam that was perpetrated by Matt Ruff and by other members of Randall Mathis's joint venture team. So the really scary thing for my mom right now is the trust has less than $170,000 in liquid assets. At the current burn rate, that's going to be in less than a year, she's going to have no money to take care of herself. This is when Frost Bank took over. There was over $5.5 million in assets that were meant specifically to take care of my mother's needs, to take care of her health, to take care of her sustenance, to have a home for her. And that's all been frittered away by a big bank who, instead of looking out for her best interests, took more than $1.5 million out of the trust and paid their own lawyers, while at the same time paying my mother's lawyers to sue the trust. It's this crazy circle. You start the fire, you pay to start the fire, and you pay to put the fire out.
As this $289,000 IRS tax levy shows, along with an over $500,000 lawsuit filed by Lubbock National Bank against the Mathis lawyers for defaulting on a $540,000 loan, the desperation mounts. And in this exchange between Randall Mathis and Bill Compton, he clearly states what's happening. Wednesday is too late. The damage will be done, and it will be big damage. I don't particularly like lawyers that write demanding letters, but I want to be clear. There is going to be hell to pay if what we have been clearly led to expect does not happen by Monday. What we will have to do will dwarf any theoretical little claim James Bowen thinks the children might have. We will lose our firm, we will lose our personal assets, and everything. With bad bank debt mounting, and with an IRS tax levy in place, the desperation builds for the Mathis lawyers. Dear Bill, as we discussed, we have to have the $250,000 to Susie early tomorrow at the latest to remain financially in business. The bank has put a drop-dead deadline on us tomorrow. We were expecting the check today. As a view into a guilty mind, Randall Mathis continues further into the email. I do not understand James Bowen asserting that the remainder beneficiaries would have to be given immediate notice of the $250,000 today. They'll get notice with the regular statement. It's a typical undermining of everything we do over and over. We need the $250,000 tomorrow, but if he screws up the rest of the distribution, the harm will be equally bad because I have to deal with the IRS right after the bank. Please get the $250,000, but do not let Bowen notify anyone. As if the elder exploitation weren't clear enough, when Frost Bank decided to use Ruff family money to bail out the desperate plaintiff's attorneys, Randall Mathis drove his elderly, mentally ill, fixed-income client to the bank to remove what amounted to 70% of the revenue-producing portion of what was left in the trust. Later, in a Texas Bar Association investigation, Randall Mathis produced a one-page, $800,000 note with a 0% interest rate, no repayment schedule, and with no collateral that Susie Ruff did not sign. Basically, this whole agreement is not commercially viable. Where did the approximately $5 million go? Well, mostly to lawyers and their agents. Let's break it down and follow the money. Nearly $500,000 was stolen by Matt Ruff in a prison scam using U.S. Postal Service money orders. $1.3 million was stolen by Brad Kaziah's paralegal named Lynn Vu. $800,000 has been used to pay the IRS tax levies and bad bank debts of the Mathis lawyers. $1.6 million was paid to James Bowen's law firm to fight the fire that the bank started. $600,000 to lawyers acting as arbitrators, one of which worked for Frost Bank, a party to the very arbitration in which they were the arbitrator, and that produced this wild $67 million award. And $300,000 in management fees for clearly mismanaging the trust.
The crimes committed are astounding, and now we're right at $5 million that has left the Ruff Management Trust. And where has it gone? It has gone to lawyers for the trust, lawyers for the bank, lawyers for my mother, their paralegal, a prison scam. It has gone to the most inappropriate uses. This is a criminal enterprise where you scratch my back, I scratch your back. We take millions of dollars that is not ours and we make it ours. It is astounding, and it is offensive because the whole purpose of a trust is to carry out into the future, to protect so that others can be provided for. What if I have a child that has special needs in the future? Well, my father had wanted all of his hard work, the risks he took, the dedication he had to the business and to his employees and the people that made it what it was. He wanted that to be a force for good in our future, for the bad times, to survive the toughness, the illnesses. That's what that is for. That not to line the pockets of Dallas-based plaintiffs' attorneys who get in trouble for providing false evidence in a case, who provided false evidence in this case. That's not what he wanted. That's not what the law supports. That's not what the rules support, and that's not what's right.
I grew up believing in the laws of the United States, believing in Texas, believing that property rights meant something. And instead, what's happened, based on a fraud perpetrated by Randall Mathis, taking advantage of, exploiting a woman with psychiatric illness who will do anything that those lawyers say, obtained a judgment in secret with no evidence And again, remember, I didn't take anything from my mother. I haven't taken a dime. I've never received a dime from the Ruff Management Trust. And yet this judgment is out there, and they're using it to pummel my wife, my family, and to try and steal their property. It's a complete perversion of the law and a complete perversion of the system. And it needs to be stopped. Because if it can happen to us, it can happen to anybody. And that's not what the laws in the United States are all about. And that's not what property rights in Texas are all about. And that's why we're looking to put a stop to it now and to raise the issue. How is it that well-funded plaintiffs' attorneys can go take a fraud perpetrated on the court and end up with a piece of paper that says they get to come steal $67 million from a family that never had that money? It's stunning. It's almost unreal. It's hard to process it. But I soldier on because of the support of a loving wife, because of the support of my siblings, Mark, Tracy, and Kelly. I've been so blessed by this tremendous support system that actually is in place because of the things that my father talked about when we were young, because of the fact that he gave us a chance to choose our own faith. I'm a Lutheran, I'm a Christian, and I understand that no matter what, that Christ saved me. And so that's one of the ways that I'm able to keep going forward. And again, I feel mostly for my wife. I feel for Mark, Tracy, and Kelly. I feel for the collateral damage that's caused by this. My mom, in conjunction with plaintiffs' attorneys, has truly become a destroyer. She's destroyed wealth. She's destroyed the family. She's destroyed hope. She's taken away so many things that my father worked so hard to build. And it's really sad to see when it's something that was so important to him, and yet the family's been decimated by it. But that's not what's going to define us. What defines us is the fact that I'm loved. I'm loved by a wife who has been through hell because of this. I'm loved by siblings who have been through so much because of this. And that they show up every day and they support me because they know what's right. They believe in what's right. And sometimes you don't give up. You don't walk away from a fight. You do what's right and you fight for justice until the fight's over. And this fight's not over yet. And we're not gonna let a fraudulent judgment stand. And we're not just gonna sit and turn things over to the Mathis lawyers just because they were able to convince 3 arbitrators in a sham arbitration in secret, just because they were able to pull the wool over the court's eyes, using fancy language, breaking the rules, lying all the time, painting the Ruff children into something that we are not. But I believe that in the end, we will be vindicated. And what's going to be left is a family that truly loves each other, that builds a new foundation, that builds a new future, and that puts all of this behind us.
In the early 1990s, when my father got that diagnosis, and he learned that he didn't have much time left, he was very aware of his mortality. He had survived the Vietnam War. He had been injured twice. And he always, I think, felt like he was living on borrowed time. And that's why he lived an incredible life. It was a full life. It was busy from the minute he woke up to the minute he went to bed. And it was, he invested in good things. He invested in his children. He invested in his marriage. He invested in his relationships and business. And he invested in good works, in charities, in the Boys and Girls Club. He did so many things that were such positives for everyone else around him. And when he got the diagnosis, it was a combination of his spirit, of his courage, of his will to live, that allowed him to stick around for just a few extra years before he had to go. And again, as a deeply religious man, he wasn't afraid of those things. He embraced the opportunity of knowing that he had a little bit of time left, versus the sadness of not having set things up and going immediately. So that's part of the legacy that we have today. Is as a family, we're doing exactly what he would want us to do in this situation. We're sticking together. We're supporting each other. It appears to outsiders this is a dispute about money. It's not. This is a dispute about family, about our futures. So for us, the challenge is, how do we navigate that? How do we stay intact as a family? How do we fight for what we think is right? How do we compromise when we have to, but don't compromise when you don't have to? Someday, maybe I'll get to tell my kids about this, and maybe that's why this means so much to me of telling our story, because it's a unique story, but it's also very common with so many households in America, and maybe there's something we can all learn from it. Maybe our system will get better. Maybe mental health will be addressed more appropriately in this country for what it is, for the crisis that we're in. But until that day, we have to stick together, and we have to do what we think is right. I have to follow my heart, and my heart tells me that some good will come from this. I don't know when, and I don't know where, but some good will come from this. I'm closer now to my sisters than I've ever been. I'm closer now to my brother Mike than I've ever been. So if we can get through this, if we can stay intact as a family, if we can go pursue the best life that we can live to help others, then we'll be successes as individuals. Then we'll be successes as couples, as parents, and we'll be a success as a family.